What is up, everyone? Before we get started, let's just do a quick audio check. Let's see if everyone can hear me and if everything's all good, and then we'll get started. I was originally meant to obviously do my live stream yesterday. If you were in my Discord server, you might have seen me say something of that sort, but unfortunately, due to some technical issues, I wasn't able to get it started. Excellent. Excellent. Perfect. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I know it's a bit of a weird time. Obviously, it's early morning here in Australia. Well, almost noon. But I figured for my other viewers from the US, Canada, the UK, parts of Europe, and as I can see here, parts of Chile and even Brazil, which I didn't think had people watching me from, have tuned in. So I'm very glad to have everyone here. I figured, oh, excellent, Texas. Shout out to you. I have never been, but hopefully I can get there one day. So I figured I would do this live stream today as part of a new strategy I had for the channel as well, on top of wanting to connect with my viewers a lot more. Obviously, the type of videos that I do are videos that a lot of people feel quite connected to. Some are quite emotionally charged. A lot of them cover issues that impact you in your day-to-day life. So hopefully my channel can be sort of a conduit to talk about these things and find solutions. And obviously, one of my favorite things to do is to react to the BS we see quite often in the world. So, to get started, first of all, I'd like to say 50 episodes. It doesn't seem like it, but here we are. When I first started this channel last year in February, my goal was to get 1,000 subscribers and maybe just a few videos here and there. But for it to become what it is, I would have never thought it would turn into what it is today. And for that, honestly, thank you so much. Like, this channel would not have existed without the support, the viewership, and all the lovely comments I get from people all around the world. It's been unbelievable, this journey. And on that subject, there are a number of questions that I did receive a few weeks ago. So I did mention to everyone, look, I'm doing a 50 episode special, and I'll probably make a little clip of this and post it on the channel as well. But there were a number of questions that I got asked about reflecting on the journey, and one of the more popular ones, my journey on leaving Islam, where I grew up, what that was like, and also for today, I figured we could also cover a few big topics in relation to some of the news that we've been seeing on TV and whatnot recently. So let's get started on reflecting on the journey. As I said, I would have never really thought this channel would become what it is today. So I'm certainly very excited to keep it going, to grow it, and to essentially just keep doing what I'm doing. But as I said, there might be a few changes here and there where I try to do a little bit more live streams and react more to content that I see online, where I can put out videos a little bit more often. As you know, these days, I only put out a video maybe once a week or maybe once every fortnight. I'm a one-person team. There's no one else here. I do everything from the thumbnails to the research to the editing. Every single part, every single thing is myself. So hopefully that will change things a little bit. So the biggest lessons perhaps I learned from content creation, I'm just one guy. I've never done something like this before. Certainly has been the amount of people that I feel like I've been able to impact in a good way. There are a lot of things that I've spoken about that sometimes it's hard to I guess really understand how much it impacts people. Anything from the conflict around the world, to how society's changing, to Islam's role in Western societies, and on the internet as well. And that has been quite important to me, and that really remains the driving factor behind the channel, because I know how much it really impacts my viewers and my subscribers and people who aren't subscribed, but and from all around the world. So that really is the driving factor. And in terms of how the audience has shaped the channel, that really is it. Over time, I obviously didn't start off as a channel that spoke about Islam, and obviously that is because I knew the immense pressure and certainly the risk that talking about Islam poses. And I'm not just talking about on a personal safety aspect. As many of you might know, talking about Islam is not a great way to make content. You always run into the risk of YouTube demonetizing you, YouTube reducing your reach, completely restricting your videos, all of which has happened to me previously. And it overall is a very high risk environment. And where I live in Australia, multiple states are currently passing laws that are essentially blasphemy laws, which makes it very difficult for people to criticize Islam without the risk of any random person saying this person is vilifying a group of people, and then that suddenly becomes a legal issue as well. So it's certainly not something that's easy to talk about, but it's certainly a big risk. As you can see, even many years after Salman Rushdie first published the Satanic Verses, his life was threatened only recently. So these things haven't changed over the past 20 years. And very soon into my journey, I learned that I needed to ensure that I somewhat needed to wear a mask. And that's even evolved to what I'm wearing today, considering the type of threats that I've received at the past. So overall, that is how the audience has shaped the channel. But in the future, I would certainly like to put myself on screen more so that I'm able to connect with my audience a lot more. And I've certainly felt that during my live streams as well. So let's get to the 50th episode Q&A. The most asked question, without a doubt, is why I left Islam. I'm not entirely sure I've spoken about it in detail, not even in my live stream. I spoke a little bit about my upbringing and that, but as to why I left Islam, I haven't gone into depth. So this video will be the first time that I've done so. And it's a really fun story, I think, and a unique one, because most ex-Muslims you hear about, they're either from the Middle East, or places like Pakistan, maybe, Indonesia, or in I feel like a number of cases probably in the West, where it's much easier to leave Islam. But for me, I grew up in a country called the Maldives. I'm pretty sure most of you have heard about it, but if you have not, it is one of the smallest countries in the world. You probably know about its beaches as a great honeymoon destination. These pictures that you see on the internet aren't exactly reflective of what the reality is for most people who actually live there. And that's where I grew up. So to give you some context around how it works in the Maldives, it is apparently one of the few countries in the world that is 100% Muslim. And the way they do it, obviously not true, because here I am. And the way they do it is they've put it into law. So you need to be a Muslim to be a citizen. So the second you stop believing, you lose your right to be a citizen, and that causes obviously a lot of problems. Now, the official penalty for leaving Islam is either imprisonment or the death penalty in the Maldives. Fortunately, they have not actually implemented the capital punishment for anybody leaving Islam. Obviously, it doesn't happen very often. And even if it does, people don't really outwardly come out and say, hey, I've done it, because of the amount of issues it causes. Primarily, the way the Maldives, which was essentially a dictatorship for most of the past 50 years, um, was the government uses extrajudicial ways to get rid of apostates. So by that I mean, what they would use is they would pay, or they would not really care about radical elements in the country if they go ahead and gets rid of ex-Muslims rather violently. And it's happened quite a number of times. And on top of that, I know a lot of people who've lost their lives because of this. So growing up in the Maldives, I grew up a normal Muslim. There was really nothing too special about myself. I grew up being taught how to pray, how to recite the Quran. I was actually quite good at it too. However, one thing I've always thought about was the fact that people didn't really understand any of the words, whether it be during prayer or reading the Quran. It was entirely in Arabic. It's not a language that people spoke. It wasn't indigenous to the country. It was essentially a form of colonialization in the Maldives, which was historically a Buddhist nation. And I really had no issues with Islam as a child. Obviously, you wouldn't really question any of that considering how brainwashed you are. But once I started getting a little bit older, I found myself quite interested in, well, we did have English Qurans, but in fact we did have Maldivian language Qurans as well. But you would never read from them. You would only read the Arabic ones, and you would recite the Arabic ones, and it was almost like a mantra. And I guess spiritually people just liked it, and that was the way they did it. So I would say the vast majority of people wouldn't have understood exactly what was actually in the book. And that would actually remain the case for most people, most Muslims who aren't Arab, I would say, unless you make an effort to actually go ahead and learn the language. So while growing up, obviously I was growing up under a dictatorship as well. So there was no freedom of speech, no freedom of the press. There was no freedom of religion. So this was the environment that really shaped my childhood. And after a while, however, the great thing was, obviously this was when the internet was really blowing up. And even the Maldives, due to globalization, was getting a lot more ideas, a lot more books. And I took quite a bit of interest in the sciences. I loved reading about human invention. No, they do not. The accent, that's just me assimilating, mate. I've now spent more of my life in Australia than the Maldives. It's where I grew up, and because I've lived in Australia now, I would say for most of my life. Yeah, that you just pick up the accent. And whatever accent, I don't even know how I sounded like back in the day when I was a kid, but I've lost all of that. And growing up, yeah, I was really, yeah, I do live in Australia. Yeah, I've done quite a number of videos on Australia as well. So growing up, really enjoyed the sciences. They were taught in school, but obviously there was a little bit of censorship around certain things. But I was able to read up on things like evolution. I really enjoyed the human journey. So from being cavemen to essentially inventing planes, and maybe a few decades later going to space. These are the things that really excited me. And I always had a little bit of trouble. I think that's where I sort of started seeing certain issues with Islam and science, because there were some differences that I just could not reconcile at all. And after a while, I think I found when Facebook first started going up, and there were a lot of other forums as well. That's what people really used back in the day. When I started using those, I came across people who weren't exactly atheists or agnostics or apostates, but perhaps a lot of people who were questioning, a lot of moderate Muslims, a few apostates, even though they at that point they weren't that confident in saying so outwardly, and there were a lot of gays. I think they made up the vast majority of apostates back in the day. Obviously, because you just sort of get a double pronged cognitive dissonance, I would say, if you're faced with that situation. So after speaking to them, I realized, wait a minute, I'm having a bit of trouble believing in this. So there was a time when I decided, okay, I'm just going to reject all the hadiths in Islam because that's where a lot of the bad stuff actually is. But it's hard to believe in Islam without the hadiths. And I think, this is all cognitive dissonance here. A part of me probably knew even back then, you know what? It's all BS. It's not just hadith, it's the Quran as well. But for a while, I was like, okay, I'm clinging on to this because, as I said before, the second you leave, suddenly you're in a lot of trouble because of the law and how the government there had set things up. And I was so young. And one of those days, I actually met an ex-Muslim, and I was so surprised by how knowledgeable he was. And I debated him all the time, and he actually remains a good friend of mine to this day, even though it was not exactly the same back then. And through debating, I was able to suddenly start seeing a lot more as to why this religion, this whole idea about the universe, about the world that I thought was true, was completely false. And once that door's open, it's extremely hard to go back to believing it, no matter what the consequences are. Obviously, you can stay quiet, and in that little group of people that I found, as the years went by, more people started outwardly saying that they were apostates, and that didn't go so well. That little group eventually, obviously, to this day, does not exist anymore. But a number of people in that group ended up being, let's just say, vanished, or a large number of them lost their lives because the government essentially, yeah, it's a tough topic for me, but they essentially paid radicals, gang members, and whatnot to just, yeah, take their lives, just middle of the street, your house, nowhere was safe. And that's when I saw my name pop up on one of the lists released by the radicals, and I was like, I'm so young, like this is so dangerous, and suddenly it puts my family into danger as well. And you never know how families would react in such a super religious place, as you know, especially if you're a woman, you might all be familiar with honor killings, and even for men, it's not an easy path. So I figured, okay, let me see what I can do, and eventually, obviously, I ended up in Australia, and I think I was very lucky. I used a lot of my, I guess, special skill set, perhaps, and I guess to this day I can say, moving to Australia, I was able to do it all on my own, essentially. There were no handouts, nothing like that. I was able to essentially just support my way into doing that. And to this day, I'm very proud of that. And I've been able to essentially call this my home. And I'm very glad I'm here. And that is why I feel very strongly about protecting where I am now and ensuring that this place doesn't become the place that I left when I was so young. And there is a very possible pathway to that happening. And that is why I try so hard, I guess, to ensure that people are very well aware of the dangers and the whitewashing especially. So that's how my journey of leaving Islam essentially looks like. So, quick questions. How did my family react? My family does not know. We have limited amount of contact, so I'll just leave it at that. However, I think they probably know that I don't really believe in the religion itself. But unfortunately, if it ever became a thing, it becomes rather dangerous for them as well, just because of how the government operates. So that's the reality. So behind all of these beaches, that's the reality of people live like, unfortunately. But silver lining, back then, maybe I could have seen, say, 10 or 20 apostates. Now it's become so common on forums like, not forums, on places like Reddit. You would see so many, and they're so open about it as well. Well, at least online. So I think in the future, if laws change, maybe those people can live freely, but I highly doubt it because it's existed for 1,000 years. So not sure how the laws change there. And yeah, that's essentially, as I have said multiple times on my channel, how Islam thrives. It makes it very, very difficult for people to leave, and often at great risk to their lives. And that's why I want to speak out, and make sure I keep speaking out. So now let's pivot towards from Islam to the other important question that people have asked: my politics, what I believe currently. So, as I've said, I grew up in an authoritarian environment. I grew up quite literally. I was born into a country that was a dictatorship, and until only maybe a decade or two ago, it was one of the it was certainly the longest running dictatorship in all of Asia. So I feel like I've somewhat developed a skill in terms of smelling BS and calling out BS when I see it. And on this channel, based on my commentary, funny enough, despite me somewhat saying outright where my political beliefs are, Ilad, I hope I said your name correctly, but as you can see on the screen, I think you can see it, the Maldives. That's where I was born. So, my politics, most people have called me the left or right, but here's where I stand, and I'll make it very clear. Generally, I would say I'm more center-right socially. I perhaps wasn't center-right for most of my life. However, I think at the moment, that's probably where I stand, and I'll explain that a little bit more. But in terms of economically, I would certainly stand a little bit on the left. And I don't know how surprising that would be to people who generally watch my channel. However, with the socially right thing or socially conservative thing, I am still a big believer in generally women's rights, for women to be given equal opportunity in the workplace and in life. Because as you know, I grew up in a place where that wasn't the case, and I know how much it impacts people within my family, women who weren't given up the opportunity, and from the second they were born, they're just born to be machines to just pump out children, and even their form itself is considered so offensive they have to be covered up entirely and stripped of all sense of humanity, really, and it's extremely sad. So in that sense, I certainly am the complete opposite. I also do certainly believe in religious and racial harmony. I know saying that almost sounds a bit cliche. However, it's not something you just say and can't work towards, which is what I think a lot of Western countries do these days. They pretend like if you just keep saying these things enough times, it just somewhat happens, but that's certainly not the case. There needs to be a lot of work, and one thing that you certainly need to do is understand, well, going back to Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance, that not every idea or not every religion is open to racial or religious harmony. It's just not possible. And in order to keep certain values like the freedom of expression and the freedom of religion, I feel like it is important to call that out. And in terms of being economically left, certainly uplifting the working class is one of the main things that I think I really truly believe in, because I'm part of that. I'm not from an elite wealthy class or anything like that, and I feel like especially in places like Australia currently, we are um, somewhat in an environment where everything, all the way from welfare, taxation, immigration, um, restrictions on certain values, like restrictions on speech, are all done to primarily benefit that elite class, and that is seriously worrying. Because I grew up in an environment like that, I find it critical to call that out and ensure that people know that if you're headed on a certain pathway, this is where you end up, and we don't want that whatsoever, because coming back from that is so difficult and almost impossible. And that is why I certainly talk a lot more about things like immigration, and blasphemy laws, freedom of speech, things like that. And just looking at one of the questions here, I'm not entirely sure I've heard about Candid with Lubna. I've not heard about that. Um, yeah, unfortunately, I mean, if it's a case of an ex-Muslim, there's so many. It's hard for me to really touch on those things unless they're sent to me, but I'll certainly check that out. Here's a question: why are you so obsessed with Islam? Well, considering I was born a Muslim, and the trauma and certainly feeling like it's something that people in a free Western country need to know about. That's why I like talking about it and making sure that a place like Australia, for example, doesn't turn into a place like where I grew up, which is what a lot of people want, by the way. Okay, so personal highlights. That was the next big question that I was asked as to some of the videos that I really enjoyed making. Top one easily is the fall of Islam. Um, when I started talking about Islam, or any other topic on this channel, I certainly did not realize it would get to almost 3 million views 6 months later. And on top of that, it just became such a popular video that I've seen like at least 20 other channels copy the exact same thing from the thumbnails to the titles, most of them being AI channels. But I'm very glad that I was able to. Yeah, yeah, there was so many. Oh my goodness, it's unbelievable how many there were. But they are those content farms that essentially look for popular videos, and they just keep pumping out a lot of copies of that. So I still stand behind what I said. I think Islam certainly would not be in the same shape it is today by 2100. As more people get uplifted from poverty, which is what most Islamic countries currently look like, I very confidently think with the empowerment of women, more access to contraception, more access to education, and on top of that, global fertility rates are meant to essentially go down quite significantly, including these countries where there is a high birth rate. A lot of people who especially Muslims on this video, their main argument was that no, Islam is actually growing through conversion, but that's absolutely not true. Islam does not grow through conversion. Islam grows through birth rates in very specific countries. So those countries will get to the same point below replacement rate in the future. And once you add in the empowerment of women especially, that's when things are going to go downhill. Funny enough, and you might not know this, it is... Oh, thank you very much, Connor, for your donation. Really appreciate it. Funny enough, certain sub-Saharan African nations who are primarily Christian, they are the ones who will still maintain an above replacement level fertility rate at that point. So, ironically, while Islam might go downhill, Christianity has a good chance of growing, especially in that area. Which is a point I actually didn't make in that video, but something funny that I thought I should mention. In terms of... Oh, thank you very much. He. Achilles heel of Islam, in my estimation. Genuinely, as I said in the video, it's the internet, knowledge sharing, and putting out as much information Drew Pavlo. Sorry, mate. I've been trying very hard, but almost certainly, Drew is one of the funniest people on X. I find one of the best Australian posters, and everyone should certainly give him a follow. Um, the internet, to answer your question, as I said in the video, easily, without a doubt, if it weren't for the internet, I would still be a Muslim today. If it weren't for the internet, you would not see a channel like mine or the hundreds or thousands of other videos and other content on YouTube, Instagram, X, whatever it is, that are taking on this religion head on. So in the past, obviously, when you had the new atheist movement and whatnot, you might purchase a book or you might see a clip here and there on TV, but it wasn't that popular. I mean, think about when Salman Rushdie first wrote his book. That was ages ago, and people were so scared to speak up about it. But these days, I feel like the internet truly, the ability to ask questions, the ability to question, like as you said, Muhammad's moral character. These are the things that will eventually end up, I believe, being very detrimental for the religion. And the other thing is the internet also provides a safe space for people to talk about it. So I'm talking about apostates. So if a lot of apostates essentially come together and are able to share their thoughts and their and help each other out, I think that would play a big part in its downfall. Now, one other big thing that I didn't talk about in this video was how AI might also impact the religion. I have a video coming up about that, so hopefully you'll see me talk about it a lot more. The other video that I think, which I made very early on, was this video, is the West finally waking up to the rise of Islam. It's got almost 500,000 views. I was quite proud of that because I was able to essentially show that quite a number of European nations especially were finally starting to realize, wait a minute, this experiment perhaps is not going so well. So hopefully I think quite a number of people have seen this and they've really enjoyed seeing it as well. But here's the kicker. This video has been demonetized. YouTube was not able to tell me.
Quite a few artistic.
YouTube was not able to tell me why it was demonetized as well. Like, they were not able to point it out. I've thought about this video with them quite a bit, but unfortunately they just simply did not say. They just refused. Initially, the video went through 2 levels of review and it was approved. They said there was no problem, said that it completely abided by all of YouTube's guidelines, which is why I uploaded it. Generally, I'm very careful with that sort of thing. Unfortunately, in this case, they just refused to budge. And it was many months later after it had actually racked up all the views that they did it. So I don't know why that is. Perhaps someone working in the back end there who's not really happy with what I said. Why do I think that? Very good question. And it's a very easy answer, shockingly enough. Freedom of religion, freedom of ideas, and not vilifying people based on certain immutable characteristics, like obviously their ethnicity. These are things I think everybody finds very important. However, I did a video recently on Adnan Hussein, one of the MPs in the UK, one of the Muslim Rights Matter MPs, who actually talked about how criticizing Islam is equal to racism. And I think this is where the big problem is. Because in a lot of Western countries, especially the ones who obviously run companies like YouTube and X, they've conflated Islam as a religion with Muslim as a race for some reason. But Muslim isn't a race. It's anyone who believes in the religion of Islam. You can be Arab, you could be Chinese, you can be African, you could be whatever, American, British, you can be a Muslim. It doesn't matter what your ethnicity is. Unfortunately, they have conflated this, and when they have written up guidelines, they've just made it so that if you criticize Islam, they've made it very difficult where there's a fine line you've got to walk where they don't want you to essentially vilify people. But sometimes when talking about things like radicalization, how is it that you can speak about these things without speaking about people, without how these communities are? That's why it is so difficult to talk about it on platforms like this. However, you know what? Like, it still remains one of my favorite videos that I've made. And the next big one that I've really enjoyed, I mean, it's a personal favorite of mine. It's not one with a lot of views. In fact, one of my least viewed
First
videos.
hand.
But it's what Islam really says about Jews. And I think, yeah, Nick, I'm surprised to find Drew here as well. This video I really enjoyed making because it provided a very in-depth historical context behind why there's so much animosity between Muslims and Jews, where it came from, how Jews were treated when Islam was founded, how Muhammad treated Jews and his wars against them, the verses and hadiths that talk about Jews and why they exist. So I very strongly feel like this is a video that provides quite a bit of context as to why this current war is ongoing and why it is just so difficult to find a solution to. Because if you think about it, if your religion specifically calls out a certain group of people, and if you truly believe that that is the word of the creator of the entire universe, yeah, convincing people not to be prejudiced is very hard in that case. Yeah, and it's been ongoing for essentially 1400 years, and it hasn't found a solution. So this remains one of my favorite videos of all time, and I think I quite enjoyed it because I was able to generate some AI videos to essentially demonstrate how it might have looked like historically. It was the first time I had done something like this, and I think in the future, if AI continues on this path, I would like to make a more in-depth little short video, a movie like that. I think that'll be really fun to do. Here's a question: have you noticed the attempt to retcon Australian first settling to Muslims? They're saying they can... Yeah, I've seen that video. I don't know if you're talking about that specific video where... Oh, God. Where can I find this? I don't know if it's on X. But I know exactly what you're talking about. There was a video that went viral recently where an Australian Muslim claimed that they... Oh, here it is. Here it is. I'll play this for you.
Bush, here's something they don't teach you in school. Muslims have been in Australia far longer than European colonisation. Muslims built real, respectful relationships with Aboriginal communities. They traded goods, shared stories, built families, and they did it with integrity. While the colonisers destroyed, Muslims built relationships based on trust and respect. And this isn't just history, it's connection. The Aussie bush is part of a land that we've been connected to for centuries. So before you come at me or the other Muslims in Australia, maybe take a second to learn about history and leave that racism at the door.
Oh, okay. That's unfortunate. But essentially, I think she's simplified a lot of this. The people who she's talking about were Indonesian traders that came across to Australia, and I don't think they actually ventured really far into Australia either. They simply went to, I believe, the Northern Territory. I can fact check that, but they didn't really do too much. They traded a little bit. I think they perhaps taught the Indigenous Australians a bit of their writing, and that's about it. It wasn't, whatever she's saying here, respectful relationships. You know, I believe Indonesia is one of the few countries that actually converted to Islam based on trade and not through colonialism. And so I feel like she's trying to make it look like, or sound it look like, this was the stock standard of Islamic imperialism around the world, but that's not the case. I would say the indigenous Australians are extremely lucky that the people who came to their shores, if you're talking about the Islamic Empire, weren't the ones who really did plan to essentially take over the world and even trigger the Crusades. Because as you know, they invaded Spain, they ruled over Spain for quite a long time, they spread across Arabia. Islamic. This is where they started and this is where they ended up. And this lady is making it sound like if these people also came to Australia at the time, that it would be very peaceful. No, it would not have been peaceful at all. It would have been rather brutal. Everything that happened in these areas of the world, including slavery, making the dhimmi system, where you essentially force the indigenous communities to either pay a tax called jizya or, well, they get the capital punishment, or otherwise they would have had to convert. So these things didn't happen because the Indonesians were actually quite peaceful, and this was a very minute event on the grand scheme of things. Obviously, make no mistake here, I'm not saying what happened in Australia at the time was all good. Obviously, there's a lot about it, and we should be able to recognize that and call that out. However, in the end, Australia has also become one of the greatest countries this world has ever seen. There's no doubt about that. So, yeah, that's I do agree, Nick. There was an attempt by this woman to make it sound like something it wasn't. It was complete BS. I don't think I'm able to swear on live stream, unfortunately. Okay. Now, we're going to go into the next segment, and it's something I've been meaning to talk about for a little bit, and it's on globalizing the Intifada and how that has now certainly come to the West. You might have seen it on the news where a man was charged after he got rid of two Israeli embassy staff in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, this was not unexpected, as sad as that sounds. We have now had, leaving aside the conflict in Gaza. I have been saying this for a year, longer than that now, that the rhetoric that we're seeing in the US, the UK, Australia, lots of countries in Europe, eventually you'll start seeing it in those countries. We're not going to be seeing it in Gaza or Israel. We're going to be seeing it in these countries as well. And why is that? All of these countries have had a large, an immigration system that's allowed very large Muslim populations in over the past 20 years or so. And I don't think anyone really realized the impact that would have, because in one of my latest videos, I talked about how in Britain, for example, most Muslims, over 70%, identify themselves as Muslim first before being British. And that would be the case anywhere. In Australia, Britain, the US, that would be the case. In fact, in Britain, more Muslims joined a certain organization that starts with an I over their armed forces. So if you think about it, this was not unexpected. And the problem was, if a lot of governments, obviously, you have the freedom of expression. You can protest against Israel, you can protest against Palestine if you wanted. Whatever you want, you can do it in an organized way that does not demean or vilify or especially physically harm people in these countries. However, after almost a year and a half, yes, I do know this is a leftist, and I'll get to that in a second. But after a year and a half of especially the left and the Red Green Alliance talking about globalizing the Intifada, talking about, taking up rhetoric that absolutely is extremely anti-Semitic and borderline, talking about these ideas that come from 1940s Germany. Like, where did people think this was going to end up or lead to? In Australia, there have been multiple cases of potential mass casualty events that were reported by the police. Lots of organized crime elements that were planning attacks on synagogues and whatnot. At the end of the day, the people that it's harming, if we can look past religion or whatnot, the people we're harming are Australians. The people we're harming are Americans. The people we're harming are British. They're the people living in these countries that are being harmed, that are facing threats to their lives. And these are very real threats because these are organized and radical people who are leading this. Now, how this has evolved is through the Red Green Alliance. Some of my favorite topics to talk about. The person who did this, I will not say his name because I don't want to give him any attention. The person who did this was a radical leftist who was absolutely, completely radicalized by online leftist rhetoric around this conflict recently. And I believe he was part of a rather famous socialist group as well. And it is ironic, Badadan, because Islam is an ultra-conservative religion. So echoing that rhetoric from progressives, it doesn't make sense. On paper, it should not make sense. So the Red Green Alliance, so the red stands for leftists or progressives, and the green stands for Islam. So the Red Green Alliance is essentially an alliance between Islam and the left, what you see in the modern world at the moment in essentially every country. Ironically enough, yes, Star Hopper, that is exactly why this alliance actually exists. It is because both parties their end goal essentially is to gain ultimate power and rule the countries that this is happening in. Ironically, like I said before, Islam is an ultra-conservative religion. However, all the voting blocks where there are large Muslim populations, they keep voting for left-wing parties. Oh, do you? I didn't think you would pick up on that. Yeah, those are my dogs. And they are black dogs as well. The ones that under Islam are considered demons, I believe. Yeah, so in this case, those enclaves essentially vote in big numbers for the left, which is why in the UK, you might have recently seen the Muslim Votes Matter movement. They were extremely successful in the UK, and I believe they got around 4 or 5 seats. In the next election, they're looking at significantly more. I think I've heard it might be almost 20 seats or something like that they might be looking at winning, which is, the Gaza independence. I think people should be very concerned about this. You know why? Because their goal, now they might say all this about Palestine, but once you gain that sort of power, do you really think their only focus is going to be Palestine? That it's just it's a thought. It's something you shouldn't even think about. You know why? Because the second it happens, and you didn't really need people in positions of power for this to happen. In Australia, for example, all the meat you eat are already halal certified, which means the way they slaughter animals is not very humane, for example. And on top of that, they've certainly brought about a lot of legislation to make talking about Islam high risk. They've put it, because of that, places like YouTube, for example, the platform itself has essentially adapted those laws. We're talking about blasphemy laws in the UK. I know for a fact that they exist in one way or the other. You cannot. The other day, someone was arrested for a public demonstration with the Quran, and at the moment, if you are unable to essentially speak about Islam in an area with a lot of Muslims, because there have been riots, there have been parents who had to essentially go to mosque because their mentally ill child might have done something to the Quran, for example. This is where the UK is at. So yeah, and even dogs. Apparently there have been some movements where certain neighborhoods which are enclaves are trying to ban dogs as well. So it's certainly not a just for Palestine sort of thing. It's something much more significant. But here's the good news. In Australia, this movement tried to pick up and it completely failed. They did not win a single vote. Not a single seat. What did happen, however, was the left-wing party, they are trying to appease quite a number of these electorates with a lot of Muslims. So we might be seeing a lot more policies that are geared towards helping achieve that community's goals. So whether it be Palestine, Israel, or how society functions, we're going to be seeing a lot of that, regardless of whether they want or not. So in a way, they have achieved their goal, but luckily, at least, I don't believe the Labor Party are going to be an Islamic party, if that makes sense. So this is it. I truly believe we're at this inflection point where Western societies are changing so fast and so significantly. And what we're inviting is an ideology that is antithetical to everything that we believe in, whether it's freedom of speech, freedom of religion. It's against all of that. Equality of women, none of that. If you think about it, in a lot of places like Europe and Germany, Hamburg, that incident that you might have all heard of, women do not feel safe like that anymore. It's not safe for them. And it's a huge problem that governments are so scared of tackling. So hopefully this incident, I hope, is an opportunity for people to sort of wake up, because it might have happened in Washington, D.C., but unfortunately, it is very likely that more events like this, and we're not talking about Israelis here, we're talking about people of the Jewish faith, for example, or even Christians, might have to live in a high-risk environment in their own countries. And that is unacceptable, in my opinion. Was it difficult for me to integrate into Australia? No, not really. I think Australians are extremely friendly. All my friends, all my closest friends were born and raised here, and it was a very welcoming environment. And, you know, when you're really young, like, it's easier to get into those social circles and essentially assimilate better, I think, and integrate and adapt those values. So I would say no. Perhaps if you were a little bit older, I think if you were a newly moved person, I think a lot of immigrants I do find have a lot of issues assimilating. But I think that's primarily because of age. Why do I think there has been such a massive ignorance? Well, number of reasons, I guess. Number one, people don't really understand what the religion entails. Obviously, all of it is in Arabic, as I said. So the vast majority of Muslims themselves don't understand what the religion actually talks about. And there are things like, as you know, Muhammad's wife's age, for example. These weren't issues before the internet. Nobody really complained about them. They were just accepted as they were. This is what I was taught in school as to her age, for example. It's only become an issue now because of the internet and because obviously people's morality has changed. Yes, I am paid by Mossad, by the way. They are, and the CIA. The other day, I think someone actually accused me of working for the ruling party in India. I'm like, please don't bring that conflict into this too. Yeah, so a lot of people don't understand what the religion actually says. And in the West, obviously, these are minorities. And I think everybody can accept that it is, generally in a democracy, you still want to ensure that minorities can live freely and without too much trouble and discrimination. And that is fine. However, what they did not expect, I think, especially Western countries, and take Australia as an example, for the vast majority of its immigration history, I find that most immigrants were European in their background and they were Christian. So when you apply those values like freedom of speech or religion or whatever that may be, it was actually quite easy to integrate them. And I think these countries were quite spoiled by that, and they got a very different image of what things should actually look like. So suddenly when you start getting people who might not necessarily believe in these values, suddenly everything changes. And they do not know how to act. And they're applying the same, ideas to what they apply to these Christian European immigrants to the newer ones with ideas that might not necessarily be complementary to Western values. And it just doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. And I think a lot of Western governments are at a loss for what to do because they can't outright go out and say this and that about Islam because they suddenly now rely on a lot of these electorates to win elections. You look at it in the UK, you look at it in Australia, you look at it in Canada. They rely on these communities suddenly to win elections, and they absolutely cannot criticize a religion. In the UK, these Gaza independents are talking about actually passing laws that ban the criticizing Muhammad. It's unacceptable. The UK has had immigration for how long now? And I don't believe in the 2000 or 2020s, anybody from those immigrant communities, apart from this particular one, has come out and said, hey, we should criminalize talking about the founding member of our religion. It's just absurd to me. And yes, it was the same guy who talked about cousin marriages, actually. So, obviously, the Western countries, Western cities are in a lot of trouble. Now, that kind of brings me to this gentleman here. His name is... Should I say his name, actually? Yeah. His name is Guy Christensen. He's only 19 years of age, and he has 3.2 million subscribers or followers on TikTok. Now, obviously a very young man, but he made the news recently for saying something rather interesting, I would say. And that was after the Israeli embassy staff incident, he came out and said, it's time for us to escalate. Now, look at it. First of all, let's just have a good look at this guy. I actually cannot play this video on stream because I don't believe it will go in line with YouTube's guidelines. However, you can go ahead and check it out on this X link. But look at him. He's wearing this Jordanian keffiyeh, the red one. He's a Mormon. He's got Jesus Christ on his t-shirt. It's just, this guy is so confused. It's insane to me. And look at him. God. This guy is the face. This guy's telling people to escalate. There's some absurdity to it, honestly. First of all, I don't think he probably knows too much about Islam. I actually searched for him and something really funny came up, and I thought I would share it with you. Yeah, this is what came up. And I thought Darth Vader came up. So yes, he is a Mormon actually. Not him. This 19-year-old is a Mormon, and his parents are Mormon as well. And his mum was a CNN journalist. So I would assume somewhat very they would lean towards a certain way ideologically and politically. But that doesn't give you an excuse, well, to say it is time to escalate. And I feel like this is part of the whole globalized Intifada, where young, white, affluent people from Gen Z are essentially trying to cosplay as jihadists, trying to laugh as these resistance fighters. Just look at his outfit. It's insane to me. And this is actually forgetting about the whole conflict itself. I look at this and it looks like a joke to me. Like someone's dressing up for Halloween. Like he's you know how absurd it is sometimes when like a white dude dresses up in a Mexican outfit or an African outfit, and it's just people would laugh about it, and these days it's probably not going to be acceptable. This is the same to me. It's no different. It's just so horrific looking at it. And radical leftists are just falling for this, and now they're calling for an escalation to violence. And it just cannot be something that exists in Western countries. Obviously in the US, the laws are different for your freedom of expression because of the Constitution. In Australia, I think in the UK, and I don't even think in Canada, this person would have been able to say what he said without certain legal threats from governments because of how serious it was. Now, obviously, a lot of people have gone to Kash Patel, and I don't know if he's being investigated for it. But what you're looking at essentially is the face of the Red Green Alliance. It is Nightshade. It absolutely it is. There's no doubt about it. This young man is the face of the Red Green Alliance, and I feel like they truly, it's not a laugh. They truly believe in what they're saying, and I think they'll be the vanguard of defending Islam these days, because as I said previously, this video I made about the history behind Islam and Jews, it's all right, a boy in that case, if he identifies that way. People like that really don't understand the history behind this conflict, for example, and why Islam believes in what it believes, and I find that really worrying. And I do think in the future, people like this would certainly be held responsible for incidents like the embassy attack. What I don't want to see is things like this come to places like Australia. It is very likely. What does escalate? Yeah, escalate means exactly that. And this is the thing about the whole, no, I'm not against Jews, I'm only against Zionists, but I think statistics show something like not over 90% of Jews are Zionists because they believe that Israel is their homeland, and they deserve, Jews deserve a home. I don't believe that these people truly believe that. I do believe they're only against Zionists, as they say, because number one, they don't believe in a two-state solution, which is what a lot of countries like Australia generally call for. What they believe is in a one-state solution, because why else would they say from the river to the sea? From what river? What sea are they talking about? And how does that look like for 15 million people who currently live in Israel, for example? How does it look like around the country? No, I am not Lebanese. I am Maldivian by ethnicity. I do like Lebanese bread though. And I have enjoyed Lebanese food. Correct. So what does that look like? These people refuse to mostly say outwardly what that looks like and what their real goals are. And a lot of the time, especially talking to leftists and Muslims around this issue, this might almost sound funny to you guys, but I almost say something like, should the leftist white people leave the room so that you can tell me what you're actually thinking without us tiptoeing around the real issues, without us whitewashing Islam, without all the BS, so that we can get to the real conversation. I say that point a lot, and I think about it a lot as well, because in the grand scheme of things, I don't feel like a lot of people say what they really do want to say. And that's why I think some of the videos that I've made about, for example, the mask slipping, those have worked really well, considering the fact that that's when people even accidentally, for example, say what they actually believe. And when that comes out, it's generally not a good thing. But the good thing for us is we absolutely get to say, get to see what they actually believe, and we can start figuring out what to do about it. Well, the other thing I guess would be for voices like these, I feel like it certainly motivates me more to make more videos and do things like this, because I feel like I'm sort of in the middle here. Like, obviously, this can be countered by Jews living in America who are American, or even Israelis, but to have a real tangible horse in this race. Whereas I feel like I can really critically see through that mask, see through the facade, and call out BS as I see it, because I'm neither Muslim or Jewish, so I can just go ahead and say, hey, hold on a minute. What you're saying is actually not right, and I don't think you're telling the truth, and I don't think you know exactly what you're talking about. And I feel like that really does motivate me to keep going with what I do. So for how long am I going to stream for? Well, I did plan to essentially do around a little bit over an hour. And these are the topics I essentially had planned. However, I believe we can somewhat go into a Q&A section, and yeah, I'll give it to the crowd. I did think if people are interested, I'll just start like Marvel Rivals or something and just do a chill stream, but it really depends on how many people are on stream. So sorry about that, guys. I think it should be fixed now. I accidentally switched to the wrong mic. Can you hear me now? Okay, excellent. Whoops, I was talking a lot of crap while I as I switched. Yeah, what what I was saying was, as always, the best way to support this channel is to give these videos a like, subscribe, share it with your friends, share it with everybody you can. You can join my Discord to speak with me a little bit more. I try to be as active on there as possible. And the other way you can obviously support me is by becoming a member on the channel or on Patreon. Obviously, these videos are quite high risk. I'm completely independently run, so your support is essentially the backbone of the channel. So, okay, let's do a bit of a Q&A. Do you think this fate of managed decline can be avoided, or is it too late? I think it can be avoided. If you had a look at my video on Justin Trudeau's post-nationalist ideas, I certainly think it can be not only stopped, but I think it can be reversed. And I can tell you one reason why, and hints of that already. For example, we're seeing a lot of European countries start to adapt anti-immigration policies, even left-wing ones like Denmark, for example. And I think there is an existential crisis at the moment for the Labour Party with Keir Starmer, for example. There was an existential crisis for Justin Trudeau as well, which is why he left his position. And that, I believe that existential crisis is you cannot keep on essentially pressing that lever or using that lever of mass immigration of incompatible cultures or ideas and keep that going infinitely. And people are turning on that. If you look at the recent council elections in the UK, Reform have essentially won a very large number of seats. And Reform was just a random small party, but Nigel Farage. And for them to win such a victory, it essentially tells you what the electorate is thinking. Suddenly, you're starting to see Keir Starmer take a bit of a U-turn on a lot of things he's said. But I think to Keir Starmer's benefit, a lot of the mass immigration issues that the UK currently faces is because of the Tories. They were the ones who were in charge. It wasn't Keir Starmer who was in charge, but the Conservatives. After Brexit, immigration numbers skyrocketed, and that was primarily made up of non-EU immigration as well. So, and Keir Starmer certainly recognises that it is an existential threat to his party. So suddenly they've taken that U-turn, and now they're going to, I believe, bring about a number of regulations and laws that will try to curb immigration to pick up those more centrist votes. So that is part of reversing managed decline, I would think, because as long as the electorate doesn't change where they no longer believe in the values that make a nation, then there's a pathway forward. But if a country that doesn't believe in itself generally is destined to fail almost every single time historically. And generally, I feel like in modern times that those countries generally last for around 200, 250 years or so. Let's have a look at some other questions. Okay, thank you very much, Ludi at Historia. Yeah, that managed decline video was really, yeah, it certainly got a lot of people talking, and I really enjoyed making it too, because it's no longer a coincidence. It almost seems orchestrated. Am I optimistic? I think I am. I certainly am. I agree with you. Considering I'm trying, and I feel like a lot of people are trying, and I feel like evidence of the fact that something is working is because of the amount of people I've been already able to impact as one guy in his room making content. I feel like that says a lot. And every single person I'm able to show, whether it be managed decline, how these things are working, things about Islam, I think that's a win. And I think the tide will change. It will take a while. A lot of conservative parties were in power. So for the UK and Australia, they were in power for almost a decade or so or more recently. So we're going into a more left-wing rule for a while. However, I do think the left will be forced to essentially contend with the fact that people are no longer resonating with policies they take for granted. So yeah, it is. I am optimistic, and I would advise you to also stay optimistic. Am I concerned about the impact of some of the big Muslim content creators and influencers like Muhammad Hijab? Look, actually, thank you, Elad, by the way, for that donation. I'm not exactly concerned, and here's why. There will always be voices for that side as well, right? So there will be influences for Christianity, for Islam, for Buddhism, whatever it may be. There'll always be someone talking about it in a positive way, whatever it is. Even some real bad ideas, you'll find people talking about it in positive ways. So I'm not entirely too worried about it as long as we can push back on it without restrictions. I think that is the real challenge generally. How do I see the UK in 20 years? Oh, the UK is not a good case. The UK is what I usually talk about when I say to people in terms of, hey, what do you not want Australia to look like in the future? I immediately always say, I don't want it to look like the UK now. Obviously, it's double the population, so quite different. However, I think if something drastically does not change right now, the UK will not be a fun place in the future. JD Vance perhaps jokingly said it will be one of the first Islamic countries with nuclear weapons. So I'm not entirely sure how optimistic I'm about the UK's future. However, reform does, their recent election win, I do think represents that the tide might be turning. The Tories have certainly lost the electorate. So in the future, I think there'll be newer parties, newer faces, and I think they'll be the ones leading the charge, and hopefully trying to change the country for the better. Let's see some other questions. Yeah, Brexit was it ended up not being that great. And I feel like, yeah, I mean, a lot of people, even conservative, were in the camp of staying. And I think they've made a mistake. Obviously, it can't be changed now, but in hindsight, it was a mistake, in my opinion, because the graphs are very clear. If I can quickly find a graph. Yeah. So, as you can see, does that show? Yeah. That is just insane to me. So the people you want there essentially went down. The people who you might not necessarily want, that went up. And that is 2019 there. This is 2024. And as you can see, like, these numbers just exploded. Certainly not entirely the greatest thing. However, like I said, I do hope the UK in the future will be able to come back and find a path forward. In terms of Australia, Canada, and the US, I'm significantly more optimistic. And even in terms of other European countries, I am significantly more optimistic that things will change for the better. Iranian nationalists, I'm not deleting any comments. I haven't done any moderation. I think some messages might be retracted if they do not comply with guidelines. That's probably why they're getting removed. I haven't deleted a single one. Anyways, guys, an hour and 20 minutes. I hope you've enjoyed this 50 episode special. And in the future, I am hoping to do. Yeah, it is, Nick. It is quite strict. I often get accused of deleting comments even on regular videos, and I never do generally. And I think, yeah, it just is based on what YouTube thinks it is acceptable or not. But anyways, guys, I think I'll probably end it here. Adrian, you can once I stop the stream, you can always go back. I'll also try to clip a few of these clips here and there and upload it onto the normal channel, so that you might be able to see the highlights. Look, thanks everyone for joining. I've really enjoyed this, and hopefully I'll be able to do this every week and post some highlights on the normal channel as well. So that was what I was going to tell everyone, that might be changing on the channel a little bit. So on top of my normal videos, you might also see clips or highlights from these streams where I'm hoping to connect with as many people on a more personal level as possible. Obviously, the channel is usually faceless, but I think this way I enjoy it a lot more to be able to talk to you live and be able to answer your questions. And yeah, once again, 50 episodes, we made it, guys. Thanks a lot for that. Your support, I truly deeply appreciate it. And I hope I can keep creating more content for you. And yeah, my next video is probably going to be out this weekend, and in the meantime I'll post some clips. Excellent. Thanks everyone, and hopefully I'll see you in another live stream over the weekend, hopefully. And we'll end it right there.